What's your pandemic plan? Do you have one? The thing is, we all need to have a plan, but it's pretty hard when you're not getting straight information from you-know-who. In fact, getting straight information on COVID-19, as they're calling it now, of course, formerly known as the coronavirus, is pretty sketchy, to say the least. We know, because we're members of this planet, that China can never be trusted. That is very clear. Historically and now. Now, there are some people with VPNs that can get information outside of China, but of course they take great risk in doing so. There have been a number of things that have been going on since this began, and I'm going to keep referring to this as the coronavirus. Why? Because they're calling it COVID-19 to take your, well, to eliminate half the news. So you won't associate it. It's meant to confuse you. So you can't really keep up with what's going on. Now, Canadians have arrived back in Canada and are in quarantine. Of course, flights come and go from Canada every day, direct from China. Well, not direct, not normally, but yes, they do. They go to Vancouver a lot, dip into Europe and over to Canada and to the US. And of course, we know in the US, they're setting up military installations, which will be quarantine centers in various airports all over the United States. You don't want to start sneezing on the plane, let's just say that. Don't have a hot flash, that's for sure. Because if you register a temperature, you're screwed. The worst part of all of that is that you will be hustled in with other people suspected of having it. And then, of course, exposed to them. It's crazy. And which is why I have a very different plan than just business as usual. Because you have to understand, all of this nonsense going around here is all about keeping productivity up. Now, of course, that's why China delayed and delayed and delayed the announcement and advising you-know-who about the pandemic that was in the making. Why? Because they didn't really want to quarantine everybody until Chinese New Year, until they already had a week off. Smart for productivity. It makes you wonder what other reasons they have to have all of China indoors right now. And funny enough, I look at webcams all the time. There's only a few in China, by the way, and the air quality is terrible. Watching these webcams has gotten me to looking at NO2 levels, SO2 levels, the general state of their air, and the realization that much of China and huge pockets like Wuhan are actually considered extremely dangerous for air pollution and the perfect setup for a bit of a culling of the week. All of this is to keep the world operating, because we can now see that now the corporations' interests have superseded human interest. The corporations, government, it's in their best interest to see everybody at work. If you have to travel, they don't want you canceling. They want you to continue on. Unless, of course, you're suspected of having a virus. I don't want to travel right now, and I see no reason to do it, and therefore I'm withdrawing from it at the present time. If I was to do it, I would go to Latin America because there's no cases there. I certainly wouldn't fly through the United States and take a chance on the camps. I don't want to be in quarantine with a bunch of sick people. So I'm making a case for self-quarantine at home. It's not really present where I live, but I think we should think ahead of the game. Because what worries me more than the coronavirus is how they're going to enforce it. How they're going to enforce quarantine. How they're going to enforce the public good. And I have to look back at something that was really formidable for me. An experience when I lived in Toronto with the G20 protests. I couldn't believe what was before my very eyes, because at that time I was living in Toronto. I had really downscaled, and I was windsurfing. I lived in the West End, and I was windsurfing over at Cherry Beach. And I would take the Gardiner Expressway, and it was a Monday. And I was being kind of sneaky because everybody was at work, and I was going to sneak over and get some sailing in. And then it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and as I got closer to downtown, all of a sudden I saw military presence. And it was scary. I double took, triple took, slowed down, and the first thing was, oh my God, there's no traffic. But second was, oh my God, what are all these guys doing here? Now, I knew that there was going to be a G20 summit, and that was happening in the days to come. But on the weekend, it was supposed to be Saturday and Sunday, and this was on a Monday. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing, because I had seen militarization like this in Central America, South America. I'd never seen anything like that in Canada. And I got to the windsurfing club, and I remember talking to people about it, and we were all quite confused. I drove back through it, and by 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock that day, there was a lot more. And they were like literally along the lakefront, like in formation. And I had to think about how they were willing the situation, because as the days got closer and I kept going over to Cherry Beach, their presence got stronger. And it came to Thursday and Friday where I knew people who worked downtown, and of course the stockbrokers all knew. And the people downtown knew that it was going to be bad. Yet, that's not who we are. And that's not who Torontonians are. And that's not who the people were coming in for this massive protest against globalization. But guess who else was there that they didn't know about? The peaceful demonstrators. They didn't know that integrated security forces had been hired. It's called integrated security services. They had been hired as part of the security crew. And I'll get into this a little bit more in the future. But my point here is that as that week progressed and that weekend, that unprecedented display of force was psychological. It was not only overkill, it was absolutely contrary to what it means to be Canadian. We're not violent people, but the G20 wanted us to think we were, and honestly wanted the world to think we were. as I go back through that footage of what became Canada's largest mass arrests of people that were largely caught in the middle of brutality like we've never seen. We never hear about how that all rolled out. Well, we're going to get into that another time. But my point of this today is the fact that Canada has taken to hiring outside forces that even include US in those forces. And in times of emergency and public good, I'm wondering who they're deciding to hire to help keep order. Is that going to come from the UN? Is that going to come from integrated security services, who have a questionable, beyond questionable record in a number of different circumstances? So that's why they're getting their own show. I'm making a case for self-quarantine because I can. And I'm getting myself prepared with water, all of that kind of thing. Everything to keep me holed up for a month. I had protein powders for another month on top of that. And I have tons of that kind of stuff. I can largely do my workout at home. I can largely operate independently. And I challenge people to start thinking about how you can operate independently, but also draw yourself a case up for self-quarantine. The last thing you want to do is be quarantined with a bunch of sick people when you're not sick. And if you are sick, do you want to be in the place where it's transmitting the most? You don't. You want to be at home, safe. And you can, if they'll let us. But the best thing you can do right now is write yourself out a plan of self-quarantine. And I'm going to work on that, and I'll share it down the way. Because I think it's important that we have documentation and that we know exactly what measures are necessary in self-quarantine, what that means, and how we can go about getting it done. I don't want to tangle with forces that aren't our own. And I think it's time that we Canadians actually start discussing how this is going to go down, because we know in the UK right now, legislation was just drawn up that police can literally enter your home and take you away if you are suspected of having the coronavirus. Throwing you into a space for 24 hours while they assess, and then they can keep you with no reason for up to 2 weeks. Yes. On the suspicion, you don't even have to have the temperature. These are scary times, my friend, and they are changing right before our very eyes. And this pandemic is an opportunity to lock her down, to create new laws that supersede our human rights. And I urge everyone to think about what your plan is going to be if the time comes. Doesn't matter if it happens this time, if this is just a false alarm for us Canadians. It's coming. The coronavirus, or COVID-19, was created in a laboratory. It's man-made, it's patented. And this is going to be part of our future. What can we do? Take care of our immunity. Take care of number one. And if something like a pandemic comes, maybe it's time you take your extended vacation. And that's what it may come down to in the future. In any case, lots to ponder over. But mostly, it's about the freedom to express how we feel and discuss what if it happens here? How is it going to go down? when you start to do that, I think you're going to start making a real plan for self-quarantine. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, I would love to have you. Always likes are always welcome. If we had loves, we'd love them even better. On Facebook and Instagram too. Thanks so much.